The story of the F-15 Eagle begins at a moment of crisis, when American air superiority was no longer something to be taken for granted. In the late 1960s, the United States found itself in the shadow of a Soviet marvel, the MiG-25 Foxbat. This aircraft was fast, incredibly fast, capable of reaching speeds over Mach 3 and climbing to altitudes no Western fighter could touch. For the United States Air Force, which had long prided itself on dominating the skies, the appearance of such a machine sent shockwaves through the Pentagon. Suddenly, the F-4 Phantom II, the workhorse of American air power in Vietnam, looked outdated and vulnerable. The fear was clear. If the Soviets deployed these aircraft in large numbers, the U.S. might lose the advantage it had always counted on. From that fear came determination. The Air Force launched the FX program, a competition to design the ultimate air superiority fighter. Unlike multi-role aircraft, which tried to be good at many things, the FX would be designed with a single purpose: to win dogfights and destroy enemy aircraft. Nothing else mattered. The philosophy was radical for its time. Instead of compromise, the F-15 would be unapologetically aggressive, unapologetically lethal, built to ensure that any opponent who crossed its path would not survive. Engineers, test pilots, and generals repeated one mantra: not a pound for air to ground. Every element of the new design would exist to guarantee dominance in the air. If you've made it this far, listening to me talk about a jet that climbs faster than your Wi-Fi downloads, then you owe the F-15 one small favor. Hit that subscribe button. It won't give you Mach 2.5 speed, but it will make sure you don't miss the next time we dive into another flying legend. So strap in, click subscribe, and let's keep this squadron growing. In 1969, McDonnell Douglas won the contract, and a new chapter in aviation history began. The prototype, designated YF-15, took to the skies for the first time on July 27, 1972. Test pilots who climbed into the cockpit described the sensation as unlike anything they had experienced before. The plane felt alive, eager, almost impatient to prove itself. For the Air Force, the timing could not have been better. The United States was licking its wounds from the frustrations of Vietnam, where American jets often struggled against smaller, more agile MiGs. There was a hunger, almost a desperation, to field a fighter that could restore confidence and ensure that such humiliations would never happen again. The physical presence of the F-15 reflected that ambition. At over 60 feet long and nearly 43 feet wide, it was large for a fighter, but its design exuded purpose. Its twin vertical stabilizers, angled sharply, gave it a predatory stance in flight. The wide swept wings provided both lift and agility, allowing it to outmaneuver opponents despite its size. Perhaps most striking were the rectangular air intakes, positioned beneath the wings, which adjusted automatically to funnel the right amount of air to the engines at different speeds. This wasn't just engineering elegance, it was survival. At Mach 215, every detail mattered, and the F-15's body was designed to slice through the sky with relentless efficiency. Inside the cockpit, another revolution awaited. The canopy was a seamless bubble of reinforced polycarbonate, offering a panoramic view of the world outside. For pilots who had struggled with limited sightlines in earlier jets, this was like stepping into another era. Visibility meant life in a dogfight, and now an F-15 pilot could see nearly everything around him, scanning for threats without blind spots. The layout of the instruments also marked a shift. For the first time, digital computers began to assist the pilot, handling small corrections and easing the workload. The machine became an extension of the pilot's body, a partner in survival, rather than just a tool to be wrestled into submission. It wasn't only the technical design that defined the F-15, but the mindset behind it. During the Cold War, air power was more than machines. It was psychological warfare. The Soviets wanted the world to believe the MiG-25 was invincible, a spearhead of communist dominance in the skies. The United States needed an answer, something that would not just match the MiG, but crush it. In this context, the Eagle was not just a fighter. It was a statement, a declaration to friend and foe alike that American skies would remain untouchable. When the Eagle first appeared at air shows, its towering frame and thunderous engines sent a message that went beyond military strength. It symbolized pride, confidence, and a kind of unspoken warning. This is what you will face if you challenge us. Curiously, the development process was not without tension. Some argued the plane was too big, too expensive, too ambitious. Others feared that technology was advancing so quickly the aircraft might be outdated before it entered service. But with each test flight, doubts began to fade. The Eagle climbed faster, turned sharper, and flew farther than skeptics expected. Pilots began to whisper that this was not just another aircraft, but something special. In interviews, many described the sensation of accelerating straight up, vertically, into the sky, as though gravity itself had no claim on the Eagle. These demonstrations became famous, often leaving crowds speechless as the massive fighter seemed to defy physics itself. There is a story told by test crews about one of those early demonstrations. At a public event, an F-15 roared down the runway, lifted off, and instead of leveling out, continued to climb straight upward, disappearing into the clouds above. The announcer turned to the crowd and said, "That's what air superiority looks like." For the spectators, it was more than a stunt. It was proof that the era of compromise was over. The Eagle was not designed to survive evenly matched battles. It was designed to ensure there would never be an even match again. This philosophy of absolute dominance defined every choice that followed. From the alloys of its frame to the layout of its radar, the Eagle represented the culmination of a mindset born in fear but executed with precision. It was the product of engineers who studied every weakness exposed in Vietnam and vowed never to repeat them. It was the result of a military establishment that understood appearances mattered as much as performance, and that the world had to believe the United States had built a fighter no one could challenge. By the time the F-15 entered service in 1976, it had already built a reputation, but the true test was yet to come. Would this sleek, imposing machine live up to the extraordinary promises made about it? Could it translate engineering genius into battlefield supremacy? Those questions lingered in the minds of allies and enemies alike, hanging in the air like the contrails of its first flights. The answer would come soon enough when the Eagle met real opponents over hostile skies, and the legend of zero losses in air-to-air combat began to take shape. And, once the first victories were scored, the world would never see the Eagle the same way again. The raw power of the F-15 was not just a matter of reputation or clever engineering on paper. It was something that pilots felt in their bones the moment they lit the afterburners and felt the twin Pratt and Whitney F-100 engines surge to life. Each engine was capable of more than 23,000 pounds of thrust, and when combined, they gave the Eagle a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1. That meant something revolutionary at the time. The F-15 could accelerate while climbing straight up. Pilots described it as riding a rocket rather than flying an airplane. Demonstrations of vertical takeoffs became iconic because they made the invisible visible. They showed the audience and the world that this machine was rewriting the rules of aerial combat. Speed was the first promise, and the Eagle delivered. Capable of pushing beyond Mach 2. 5, it was not only fast, but controllable at those extreme speeds. Many aircraft could fly fast in a straight line, but few could maneuver with precision while pushing the edge of the envelope. The F-15 could. During training exercises, pilots discovered they could gain altitude, turn, and then dive back into the fight with such momentum that simulated opponents were left struggling to respond. That balance of speed, climb rate, and maneuverability meant the Eagle could dictate the terms of the engagement, choosing when and how to fight. In the unforgiving world of aerial combat, controlling the fight is the difference between victory and death. But brute force alone does not win wars. The Eagle's designers knew that raw thrust and sleek aerodynamics had to be paired with intelligence, and that intelligence came from avionics. At its heart was the AN/APG-63 radar, a system decades ahead of what most adversaries had at the time. It could detect and track multiple targets simultaneously, offering beyond visual range engagement in an era when most dogfights still relied on eyesight and close maneuvering. Suddenly, an F-15 pilot could see the enemy long before being seen, could lock on and prepare a missile strike before the opponent even realized he was in danger. This transformed the psychology of combat. For the pilot in the Eagle, confidence replaced uncertainty. For the adversary, fear replaced hope. The integration of radar with weapon systems created a harmony that few other fighters achieved. Missiles like the AIM-7 Sparrow and later the AIM-120 AMRAAM became extensions of the radar's reach. The pilot's role was no longer limited to reacting. He could act preemptively, taking the fight to the enemy on his own terms. At the same time, the F-15 never abandoned the fundamentals of close-in combat. The M61 Vulcan cannon sat in the wing root, loaded with nearly 1,000 rounds. In the chaos of a merge, when missiles were exhausted or too close to employ, that cannon meant survival. Many pilots trained to hear the hum of the Vulcan as both a reassurance and a warning. Reassurance that the Eagle was always armed, warning that even at knife fight range it was still lethal. Training exercises quickly revealed the significance of these capabilities. In simulated combat against F-4 Phantoms, the aircraft it was designed to replace, the F-15 consistently dominated. Veteran Phantom crews who had seen combat in Vietnam admitted they had little chance against the new machine. Stories circulated of Eagles defeating multiple Phantoms in mock dogfights, sometimes without even being seen. Word spread through the ranks of the Air Force that this was not just another incremental improvement. It was something entirely new, and its promise would soon be tested in real combat. When Israel began operating the F-15 in the late 1970s, the world witnessed the first true test. In engagements over the Middle East, the Eagle proved everything its designers had claimed. MiGs that had once harassed Western aircraft fell in droves, often without scoring a single hit in return. Israeli pilots returned to base with victories in hand and no losses to report. For the first time, the F-15's record of invincibility began to take shape, and with each engagement its reputation grew. Opponents soon began to fear even the rumor of eagles in the sky. One Israeli pilot famously said that the F-15 was so dominant, it felt unfair, as though they were bringing a future weapon into a past war. The United States Air Force saw similar results in later conflicts. During Operation Desert Storm in 1991, F-15s patrolled the skies over Iraq and Kuwait. The Eagle accounted for the majority of air-to-air kills, knocking out MiG-29s, Mirage F-1s, and even helicopters pressed into desperate combat. In one encounter, F-15s downed multiple enemy fighters before any of them could fire a single effective shot. These results cemented the aircraft's reputation not just as a capable fighter, but as an untouchable predator. By the end of the campaign, the Eagle's scorecard read like a lopsided sports game. Dozens of confirmed kills, 0 losses in air-to-air combat. The psychology of that record cannot be overstated. In warfare, numbers tell part of the story, but reputation tells the rest. Pilots going into battle against Eagles knew the statistics. They knew no Eagle had ever been shot down in a dogfight. That knowledge created hesitation, and in air combat, hesitation is deadly. The Eagle's invincibility became a weapon of its own, spreading fear before missiles were even fired. American and Allied pilots felt the opposite effect, a surge of confidence, the certainty that they flew the most dominant machine in the sky. Confidence sharpens reflexes, steadies hands, and emboldens choices. The F-15 created not just victories in battle, but a culture of dominance that spread across entire air forces. Curiously, this dominance also drew criticism. Some argued that the F-15 was too powerful, too expensive, a luxury the U.S. could ill afford. Others claimed its success was overstated, the result of overwhelming American training and support rather than the aircraft itself. But even skeptics could not deny the record. Time after time, in exercises and in real combat, the Eagle emerged without a scratch. And the phrase air superiority stopped being a goal and became a description of what the F-15 had already achieved. As the years passed, the Eagle's aura only grew. Each new conflict was another chance for its legend to be tested, and each time it returned with the same story: victory without defeat. Pilots began to say that flying the F-15 felt like carrying history on their shoulders, knowing they were part of a legacy that demanded perfection. Mistakes were unacceptable because the record was spotless. And yet, time and again, they lived up to that impossible standard. What makes the story of the Eagle's invincibility so powerful is not just the statistics, but the way those statistics reshaped the idea of what a fighter jet could be. Before the F-15, air combat was a contest of equals, where skill, luck, and technology all collided with unpredictable results. After the F-15, the very notion of equality in the skies seemed outdated. The Eagle didn't just fight battles. It dictated them, controlled them, and ended them on its own terms. It became not only a machine, but a symbol, a reminder that sometimes human ambition and engineering converge to create something that seems untouchable. And yet, as impressive as this dominance was, time is relentless. The world of air combat never stands still, and new threats were emerging. Stealth technology, advanced surface-to-air missiles, and a new generation of fighters meant the Eagle would eventually face challenges it had never seen before. The question was no longer whether the F-15 could dominate, but whether it could adapt. That is where the story of the F-15EX begins, carrying forward the same spirit, but preparing for battles in a different age. The legend of invincibility was secure, but the future demanded more than a record. It demanded reinvention. By the time the F-15 had carved its place in history as an undefeated air superiority fighter, a new challenge was emerging. The aircraft that had been designed in the 1970s to dominate Soviet jets was now facing a different kind of enemy: time itself. Technology was advancing at an unforgiving pace. Stealth fighters were appearing. New generations of surface-to-air missiles threatened the skies. Combat was no longer about simply flying faster or turning tighter. It became about networks, information, and adaptability. For a moment, it seemed the Eagle might finally fade into the role of a relic, a museum piece of Cold War glory. But instead, the story took a different turn. The Eagle was reborn. The rebirth came in the form of the F-15EX Eagle II, a machine that carried the DNA of the original but was re-engineered for a new century. At first glance, the aircraft still looked like the same powerful silhouette that had terrified adversaries for decades: twin tails, wide wings, and that unmistakable stance of raw authority. But inside, the changes were profound. The cockpit, once filled with analog dials and switches, was now dominated by large digital displays, multifunctional screens that allowed a pilot to manage the chaos of modern warfare with a glance or a touch. Instead of scanning a dozen separate instruments, the pilot could see the entire battlefield synthesized into a single picture, a digital canvas of threats, targets, and allies. This wasn't just modernization for the sake of comfort, it was survival, in an era where information moved faster than missiles. At the heart of this transformation was the AESA radar, the AN-APG-82. Unlike the mechanically steered radar of the original Eagle, the ESA could track multiple targets with unprecedented precision while remaining harder to detect. It could shift frequencies in microseconds, resist jamming, and even operate in ways that blurred the line between radar and electronic warfare. The Eagle, once defined by brute power and clear sight lines, was now a master of the invisible battle, able to see without being seen. For pilots, this was like gaining a sixth sense, the ability to predict danger before it even revealed itself. And yet, for all its new abilities, the F-15EX still kept the one promise that made the Eagle legendary. It could outgun anything that dared to come close. If the original F-15 was built around the mantra of not a pound for air to ground, the EX shattered that limitation. It could carry an unprecedented loadout of weapons, including the staggering ability to mount up to 22 air-to-air missiles at once. No other Western fighter could match such a figure. In a world where stealth jets often carried limited payloads inside internal bays, the F-15EX turned its size into a weapon. Its massive wings and reinforced airframe allowed it to act as both sword and shield, carrying enough missiles to overwhelm an entire formation. For commanders planning missions, this was a game changer. The EX was not just another fighter. It could act as the arsenal of the fleet, launching a storm of missiles, while stealthier aircraft scouted ahead. But modern warfare demanded more than missiles. The F-15EX was designed with open architecture software, allowing it to integrate new weapons and systems rapidly. Where older jets required years of upgrades and redesigns, the EX could accept updates in months, sometimes weeks. This flexibility meant it could carry not only today's weapons, but tomorrow's. Hypersonic missiles, directed energy systems, and electronic attack pods. The Eagle had once symbolized finality, the end of a dogfight. Now it symbolized adaptability, a veteran warrior who had learned how to fight on battlefields its original designers could never have imagined. Pilots who transitioned from older Eagles to the EX described the experience as stepping into the future without leaving behind the familiar. The aircraft still had the raw power of its twin engines, still had the stability and reliability that made pilots trust it with their lives. But now it spoke a new language, one of data links, satellite integration, and artificial intelligence assistance. In a joint exercise, an EX pilot described how his aircraft wasn't just flying alone, but was connected to drones, command centers, and even naval vessels hundreds of miles away. The Eagle was no longer simply a fighter in the sky. It was a node in a vast, invisible network of war. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the EX is its longevity. While many modern fighters are designed with lifespans of 8,000 to 10,000 hours, the EX was built for 20,000. That meant it could fly longer, endure more, and remain relevant for decades. In an age where development of new aircraft stretched into decades and costs soared into the billions, the Eagle's return was almost poetic. Here was a machine born in the Cold War, surviving into the information age, upgraded not through nostalgia, but because it remained brutally effective. The message was clear. Some designs are timeless, and with the right upgrades, they can outlive generations of rivals. There is an irony in the F-15EX's resurgence. At the very moment when stealth fighters like the F-35 and F-22 seemed destined to define the future, the world found itself looking again at the angular frame of a 1970s jet. It proved that stealth was not the only answer, that sometimes sheer power, payload, and reliability mattered just as much. Allies who had flown Eagles for decades welcomed the EX, seeing in it a continuation of a legacy they knew and trusted. For countries wary of untested technologies, the EX offered something rare: the familiarity of a legend combined with the capabilities of a newcomer. The legacy of the Eagle, now carried by the EX, is more than a technical achievement. It is a story about resilience. Few machines in history remain relevant across half a century of warfare, yet the F-15 has done so by constantly evolving while never losing sight of its original promise: to dominate the skies. Its record of air-to-air invincibility still echoes in every briefing, every training mission, every deployment. And with the EX, that echo has grown louder, reminding both friend and foe that the Eagle still flies, sharper than ever. The question, then, is how far this evolution can go. If the F-15EX can carry hypersonic weapons, if it can integrate artificial intelligence into its decision-making, if it can remain the arsenal ship of the skies while stealth fighters slip undetected, what does that mean for the future of air combat? Will the Eagle continue to defy time itself, bridging the past and the future, or will new designs finally push it aside? For now, the answer seems clear every time its engines ignite and its massive frame leaves the runway. The Eagle is not done, and the sky is still its domain.